Thanks for joining us. This is Omni View, episode 125. It's July 27th, 2026, and as always, we're covering what happened from every angle. New week, fresh perspectives. Let's see what happened over the weekend and what's developing today. Surging profits at Chinese chipmakers signal how AI demand is reshaping global technology supply chains and national industrial strategies. China's major chip manufacturers reported profits rising 2,579.5% in the first half of 2026. The National Bureau of Statistics linked the increase to stronger demand for computing power driven by artificial intelligence applications. The figures cover state-reported data from the sector. Separate market data showed one major Chinese chipmaker's shares rising nearly 470% on its stock market debut, briefly exceeding Intel's market capitalization. The National Bureau of Statistics attributed the profit growth to accelerated AI integration across industries that generated large new orders for processors and related hardware. South China Morning Post reporting frames the result as evidence of resilience in China's semiconductor push despite external constraints. BBC World News coverage of the same period highlighted the stock debut surge of a single firm as a concrete illustration of investor reaction to the same demand trend. The two outlets together show how domestic statistical releases and global market listings each capture different slices of the same supply chain shift. What happens next? The first compliance deadlines for related export rules land later this year, and further earnings reports will show whether the pattern holds. Shifting now to a developing story in South America, Argentine President Javier Milei referred to Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva as a thief and a convict during a rally supporting a right-wing Brazilian presidential candidate. The remarks occurred as part of Milei's appearance backing Flavio Bolsonaro. Brazilian officials have not issued a formal response in the reports. The comments were delivered at a campaign event in Brazil ahead of that country's next presidential contest. BBC coverage places the comments within ongoing political tensions between the two countries' leaders, noting Milei's alignment with conservative Brazilian figures. Observers in South America often track these exchanges for signs of shifting alliances ahead of future votes. The episode illustrates how external leaders can insert themselves into neighboring domestic campaigns, a pattern seen in prior election seasons across the continent. What happens next? The next major Brazilian campaign rallies are scheduled for late summer, and analysts will watch whether similar cross-border rhetoric appears. Meanwhile, Germany's coalition government has proposed allowing some bakeries, confectionaries, and public libraries to open longer on Sundays as part of a competitiveness package. The measures respond to pressure from lower-cost imports. Retailers and unions are reviewing the plans. The package was unveiled in early July and targets specific retail categories rather than a blanket change to labor law. South China Morning Post reporting connects the proposals to Germany's effort to regain ground against Chinese manufacturers in consumer goods. Domestic coverage emphasizes the century-old Sunday rest tradition and its role in worker protections. Policymakers argue that limited adjustments could help smaller businesses without broadly altering labor rules. The debate centers on whether incremental Sunday openings can improve competitiveness while preserving the social consensus that has governed retail hours for decades. What happens next? Parliamentary review of the package begins next month, and labor groups have signaled they may seek amendments. Next, the Ghanaian government aims to accumulate 30 billion Ghanaian cedis in a sinking fund by the end of 2026 to cover obligations under the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. The first major repayment is due in February 2027. Officials say the fund will draw from budgeted revenues. The target forms part of preparations for the next phase of debt restructuring agreed after earlier exchange arrangements. All Africa reporting from Ghanaian Times sources outlines the fund as preparation for the next phase of debt restructuring. The government has tied the target to broader fiscal stabilization efforts following earlier exchange agreements. Local analysts note that meeting the goal depends on revenue collection and spending discipline through year-end. The timeline places the first large payout just months after the December 2026 budget cycle closes. What happens next? The December budget will set the initial revenue transfers, and bondholders will monitor collection figures closely. Now, some progress worth knowing about. The Hong Kong Tourism Board announced that ticket holders for 5 major events in August can receive 5% discounts at more than 100 hotels, shops, and attractions. The program runs through the month and aims to support retail and catering businesses. Participants must present valid event tickets. The initiative covers designated venues and runs alongside existing tourism promotions. South China Morning Post coverage describes the measure as a direct response to weaker consumer spending in the city. Officials expect the discounts to encourage additional local and visitor spending during the events. The 5% rate applies uniformly across the participating outlets for the full month of August. What happens next? Early August attendance figures at the events will indicate whether the discounts translate into measurable spending gains. Now, to really understand this story, there's something most coverage leaves out. Most coverage treats sudden profit jumps in chip making as simple results of market demand. Yet the underlying driver is often coordinated government support for domestic production capacity. In China's case, years of state-backed investment in fabrication plants, research subsidies, and talent programs created the infrastructure that now meets rising AI-related orders. Similar patterns appeared in earlier technology races, such as South Korea's memory chip push in the 1990s and Taiwan's foundry model, where public incentives aligned with private execution. When demand for AI hardware accelerated, firms already scaled by those policies captured the largest share of new revenue. Knowing this, when you hear claims that a single company's results prove market superiority alone, you can check whether the reported gains coincide with documented subsidy programs or capacity expansions announced years earlier. One concrete check is to compare the timing of profit surges against public records of government grants or low-interest loans to the same firms. Another is to examine whether the same firms also reported sharp increases in capital expenditure or new fab announcements in prior fiscal years. A third is to note how export control regimes in other countries have sometimes prompted accelerated domestic investment cycles that later appear in profit data. If you want to go deeper on the China chip sector results, compare how South China Morning Post and BBC World News are covering it. Tomorrow, watch for updates on whether Germany's Sunday trading package advances through committee review. That's Omni View. As always, compare outlets, look for primary documents, and separate what's known from what's assumed. The world is complicated, but it's not beyond understanding, and you just spent a few minutes understanding it better. If that's worth something to you, subscribe wherever you listen. See you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nara Network. Links in the show notes. One more thing. If you liked today's episode, our sister show, First Principles Daily, is worth a spot in your feed. Reasoning from raw materials, not analogy, on the breakthroughs that actually cut cost. It's one of the Nara Network's daily briefings, all free at naranetwork.com. New to the network? naranetwork.com/start-here picks the right daily briefing for you in about 2 minutes. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.